Good morning. I'm Pete Ferrell. I live south of Beaumont, Kansas, in the Flint Hills. I'm a fourth generation rancher. I'm fortunate to have a wind farm here, and we've been discussing the pros and cons of the development of wind farms on agricultural properties.
Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
Well, hey, listeners, welcome back to an episode of the Farm for Profit Podcast. We're excited to have you join us. We appreciate you each and every episode. As a reminder, if you have topics or ideas that you want to send our way, hit us up at farmforprofitllc@gmail.com. Send us a text message or give us a call, 515-207-9640. Just got a text message yesterday asking if we could come DJ a party, surprise 30th birthday party for a gentleman's wife. I'm not sure that was one of you guys or not, but not a fit for us and probably not a fit for our guest in this episode today. But thank you so much for listening. Again, share us with your friends and family. Please leave us a review. Apple Podcasts and Spotify are two of the major places, as well as YouTube, that help us out an absolute ton. But we're going to tackle a topic that sometimes appears to be controversial in the realm of agriculture and also in the realm of energy production. So excited to have our guest today, Pete, all the way from the ranch. How's Pete doing today?
I'm warm and vertical, Tanner. That's always a good way to start the day. So
I love that. And I don't know if I would have expected a different answer from you or not. That definitely seems to fit your personality. And your last name's pronounced Ferrell?
Ferrell, F-E-R-R-E-L-L.
Ferrell. See, that's why I introduced you as Pete.
Yeah.
Awesome. So where is your ranch? Where are you coming in from today?
We live 50 miles east of Wichita in the Flint Hills of Kansas, which is renowned as being the tallgrass prairie, the last stand of the great tallgrass prairie. Used to extend up into your area, decades ago. But anyway, the only reason this place wasn't plowed is it's too rocky.
So what does your ranch look like these days? Because you used to run quite a few head of cattle yourself, and now you've developed a relationship with a young farmer a young rancher that you're given an opportunity to.
That's correct. I managed the ranch up until about it's been a phase-out process beginning in 2017. I started a management company 20 years ago that has leasing rights to this ranch. We have a 5-year evergreen lease with the management company, and the management company owns everything you'd sell at a farm sale except the farm. So all the livestock, all the equipment, consumables, some cash. And this young man who's quite amazing, in my opinion, John Wagner, took an interest in this. And so he is now buying that management company. And so he would be the first non-family member to manage the ranch since its inception in 1888. My great-grandfather founded the place, and I'm the fourth generation of the family to run it. But now John Wagner is running it through this arrangement, and it's so far working out quite well.
I was having a conversation with a farmer the other day, and he said, Jace, I feel like my operation is held together with duct tape. Now, I had to kind of laugh at this, but the reason I was laughing is because how much truth was in that statement. There are so many family farm operations today that are literally holding their operation together with duct tape, whether it's finances, whether it's operations or things like that. Now, the reason that we use duct tape is because whatever we're using, we're trying to get the most amount of productivity out of it because we know deep down someday it's going to break. And this is the hard reality for a majority of family farm operations in this country is they know things are broken or not working, and they continue to use duct tape to just try to keep things together for a little bit longer. But eventually that road is going to come to an end. And this is the problem that we solve inside a legacy farmer and have over the past 5 years working with hundreds of family farm operations across the country. We have helped them take their operation from a place of chaos and disorganization to a place of confidence and clarity so they no longer feel like, hey, things are just held together with duct tape. So if you want to learn more about that proven process and what we we built out working with hundreds of family farm operations over the past 5 years. Go to legacyfarmer.com and sign up for a free call with our team today.
1888. That's a long run for an operation. We know we celebrate Century Farms here in the state of Iowa, but it's always neat to hear the history of how things got started. So would that be your great-grandpa that started that?
That's correct. My great-grandfather. He was orphaned during the Civil War and was one of those kind of rags to riches story. He learned Morse code. He was the first telegraph operator in Council Grove. He was the first telegraph operator in Wichita, Kansas. He was kind of a founding father over there. And but he had an amazing story where he just kind of figured out, he figured out how to fix watches. He was selling apples. He was a merchant. And eventually he put his holdings into this ranch. He kind of seemed to consolidate everything he had into this place where I now live. My wife and I live in the house that he built 100 years ago. So we have deep roots here, Tanner. And to say we love this place is an understatement. We care for it very deeply.
But as I remember from our initial conversation, the way that you took over the ranch looks much and felt much differently than the way you're currently transitioning the management and ownership of your holding company to the next generation. Tell us a little bit about how that process went.
Well, I had a front row seat on a failed succession plan. The ranch was partitioned in 1968. I don't think my dad expected me to come home because the place had been diminished in size to the point that it was going to be hard to make a living here. But I fooled him. I came back and pitched in, and quite frankly, Tanner, those were some of the most, let's say, carefree days of my life. For 5 years, I got to live as a cowboy with my college roommate was here, and we had, beer and girlfriends and not a lot of money, but we weren't worried about it. But somewhere in there, my dad says to me, "Hey, you want to buy it back?" And without giving it any thought, and you should think about that, I said, "Yeah, sure, let's buy it back." And so then he went and died on me right when my first payment was due, and so I had to grow up overnight. I had to transition from being a carefree cowboy to a ranch manager. On the day he died, I'd never written a ranch check. And so I had a lot to learn about economics and finance. And I crisis managed for a long time. I was literally in the wilderness. And I'm sure that many of your listeners will probably relate to this. It's like, all of a sudden, you're the one that's got to write the check. You got to figure this out. So anyway, it was interesting education, if you will. And I have to always mention the many, many people that helped me, extension bankers. And I eventually, I know that the name of your program is Farm for Profit. The Ranching for Profit School, taught by Stan Parsons, was a watershed for me. And all of a sudden, the light bulbs came on, and I actually realized, maybe I can do this, But it was a struggle. I just, it was not a good time for me. And if you know the '80s, there was a big dairy buyout thing that happened. Anyway, I just remember waking up and noticing that my balance sheet was half of what it used to be. And it was like, that's, how do I explain that? So.
Right. And that's just a sinking feeling that you don't have any control over because, again, a balance sheet is a snapshot in time, but it's indicative to tell you what you can afford to borrow and how you can scale your operation. And if it gets cut in half, you lose a lot of power.
You do. Farmers and ranchers, there's no stress like the financial stress. But I was so grateful to finally kind of learn the rules, if you will, of how to negotiate debt and loan repayments and cash flow and balance sheets. And Stan taught me that through his school. Like I said, I will be forever grateful that I happened into that place in that time. That was in '87. I began that, and that's when we began what are called holistic practices. We do time-controlled grazing. The other figure in this is that there's a fellow by the name of Alan Savory that was Stan's partner for years, and they taught much the same curriculum. So it was a welcome insight for me.
So that's almost 40 years ago when you had that conversation, that curriculum that helped you get to where you had a better understanding of how your operation was going to provide you a better ROI. Yeah. Are you still using some of those grazing practices on your operation that you learned then, or have some of those evolved too?
Well, yes. In fact, I met John Wagner as part of that program, and I think that's what developed the trust between us, because he understood those very same concepts extremely well, and so that was kind of integral to me to handing the operation off to him. And to kind of answer your question, he took what I started and has developed it to the next level. He's tech savvy. He's got all these cool apps on his phone that, I was doing it longhand. Well, now he's doing it digital, and, he's a master stockman. He's taken it to a much more modern level, if you will, Tanner, of understanding. And he's using many of the same principles that I employed, but his exercise of those is much better than I was able to employ, I would say.
Do you mind me asking, Pete, how old are you?
I'm 72.
So I think that speaks a lot of waves to our listeners as well, because there's a huge respect, in my opinion, from me to you for the role that you've taken in this transition, because you're allowing him to involve technology, to involve his own ideas. There's still a base principle that you're allowing to happen on your ranch, but you've really given him a lot of freedom to make choices.
Tanner, I think, it's hard to let go. But at the same time, it's been exhilarating to see, one of the things Stan did was he would bring information from the business world. Do you know, in most successful business, leadership turns over every 7 to 10 years. And we regard our tenure in ranching as lifetime. But in all honesty, this ranch business, had I turned it over 10 years earlier, would be further down the road. And, I still have ownership of the ranch. I still have a financial benefit. Now, I wasn't ready to step aside at 50, but I woke up literally when I was 60, and the hand of time slapped me in the face. And I knew, Tanner, that I wasn't going to the next level, that I knew I wasn't the guy that could get that done. And what I cared most about was the welfare of this ranch. And I just decided, if I really want to perpetuate this, I got to let go. I wanted to find somebody that was better than me. And I did. I found somebody that could carry it on to the next level.
But you also worked hard over that 30 to 40 year time period to put yourself in a financial position that allowed you to do this.
Yes.
Some almost feel constricted when they get to that age, and they don't feel like they're in a financial position to where they can let go.
Well, so Dad and I bought or initiated the purchase in '76 of the first third that had been partitioned. And then lo and behold, in the late '90s, the second third became available to me. And I'd almost paid the first portion down. It was like, whew. But then then the other piece became available, and it was like, and that put the same tract of land that my great grandfather assembled in 1888 back together. And I wasn't going to pass it up. There were a lot of pressures on me at the time. And, bankers will lend you money even when you don't know what you're doing. Okay. So when it came up, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. And I expanded my ranching. I had already expanded the ranching operation. So instead of running the core 7,000, I was leasing a lot of additional land to create the cash flow to make my payments. But Tanner, my life was, well, I know your listeners. In fact, Connor is out there today. He's having to put in, I was working unsustainable hours. I was running 3,000 cows a year. I had a crew. But life wasn't very pleasant for me because I just was so, driven to make my payments, and I was doing it. Well, imagine and Stan always said, think 10 times bigger. Think about all of your options. And so this is the segue into I think it was 94, Tanner. A couple of guys come waltzing across the lawn. I thought they were feed salesmen. I was getting ready to run them off. And turns out one of them was a retired. He had voluntarily retired from, he was an electrical engineer from Kansas State. And he had been studying the wind in Kansas for over 10 years at that point in time. He was developing wind maps that nobody else had. Nobody else was thinking about it. And he knew more about the Ferrell Ranch wind than I did. And he proposed this idea. And my first reaction was a pretty hard no. It's like, nah, that's just too far out there for me to understand. But he persisted. And it took me over a year. I did my homework, and they flew me to California. That was the only place in the United States at the time that had wind farms on agricultural property. And I got to talk to ranchers they were east of San Francisco in the Altamont Pass. And they were pretty nonchalant about it. In fact, one of them said, "What turbines? We're still watching our grass and cattle here like we always have." There was like, that was kind of, it was a breakthrough. It's like, here's a guy just like me that has the benefit of getting an extra check for something that's already there. And he's saying, there is no problem running our cattle and grass here as we always have. And so I came home, I did some more homework, and I signed a 35-year agreement. In 95, I signed a 35-year agreement. In 98, they walked away. And I went, oh, whoa, wait a minute. I thought this was a pretty good idea. And Dr. Johnson then was kind of out of a job. Fortunately, we retained the data that had been collected, and we retained the anemometers. Nobody's going to build a wind farm without knowing exactly what the resource is. So we had a 3-year data stream, and we just kept collecting data. And I went shopping for another developer. And I had 5 or 6 on my desk. And then sometime in 2001, the first wind farm was built in western Kansas at Spearville. And I decided I'm going to go tour this thing. And I'm literally on a school bus with a bunch of people and here's this greenhorn behind me. He's all dressed in a suit. And I say, well, I've got this ranch in eastern Kansas, and I got a 5-year data, 6-year data collection. And he perks up. He goes, well, I'm a wind farm developer. And I eventually do business with this guy. He is now an extremely successful. In fact, this was his his flagship thing. I had 5 offers on my desk from corporations, but I decided to do business with Sandy Reisky because he was a person. He wasn't a corporation. And anyway, it's a great story. 4 years later, the wind farm was built on this ranch due to his work. And boy, Tanner, it's been so well. Going back to this succession issue, it's been very helpful for me to have this other form of income to support me because I don't need the ranch income as much. I still collect rent, but it's allowed me a lot of financial freedom. It's just the truth of the matter.
So what year did you end up having them built? Now you're early 2000s?
Yeah, it was completed in the fall of 2005. So what is that, 19 years it's been going.
And at that point in time, you entered into an agreement that was how long?
That was a 30-year agreement. So that will expire in 35.
So you're still in that 30-year agreement?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're 19 years into that 30-year agreement. These machines are really expensive. This was a $190 million project they put on the Ferrell Ranch, and they need time to recover that investment. And that was explained to me. Why do I have to commit so much time? Well, think about the investments that we make in farming and ranching and our equipment. We want to know the longevity of that when we get the payout, and we do the math on that. And so this was an example of that investment. So
I'm glad you clarified that, because we get questions and sometimes feedback at conferences from producers that are afraid of the long-term commitment and maybe have their fear for a couple of different reasons. If they've seen wind power companies change ownership and change structure, and they've seen the evolution of the early style windmills or wind towers to what's being put up in various areas today of new technology. So when you look back and reflect on the last almost 20 years of this relationship, have you had any issues with continuity?
Well, yeah, you got a lot in that. Let's unpack that. First of all, Sandy, who developed the company, literally sold it to a developer who could build it because he didn't have the multi-million-dollar balance sheet. So he sells it, and he told me he was going to do this, by the way. He said, look, I'm a primary development here. He revealed his financial status to me. He says, I will sell this to somebody who has literally $1 billion balance sheet who can build it. And sure enough, one company built it, and within a year, it was sold to another company. That's why, if I have one thing to say with your listeners, is that, boy, you really need to do your homework on the agreement. And if I were doing it, I wouldn't do what I did, which is I would sign with somebody who had a well-known reputation. So that probably they will hang on to it. Like I would probably sign with a pretty big company, and boy, I would do exactly what I did. Go talk to a landowner who is doing business with them, because they'll tell you the truth. They'll tell you what's really going on. That would be two things.
That's a really great perspective, because that's a good point. If you go to somebody who's already done that, and has been in it for a little bit, they maybe get past the ego side of things. That doesn't want to make them seem like they made a bad decision.
Right.
They're living with their choice and hopefully are going to give you a real perspective on your answer. But I want to go back to the very first people that stepped on your farm.
Yeah.
And why in your mind was the initial thought no?
Well,
from you, because you just mentioned when they come up, you thought they were a feed salesman, but then even after that.
No offense to your listeners, but I'm not a very mechanically minded person. I mean, if it doesn't bleed, I don't get along with it very well. And so that's just my take on the world. And because of those deep roots I described earlier, it seemed, it was just really uncomfortable. Well, okay, let me back up even further. Our family has a very unsatisfactory history with extraction of oil, which is almost completely gone on this ranch. And quite frankly, there had been an extraordinary amount of abuse from the oil companies once they leased. The spillage, the damage, the rutting. So I had a bad taste in my mouth from that experience. And my family benefited. Dad told me, he said he wasn't sure they would have gotten through the drought of the 50s had they not had the oil income. So you made your point that this other form of income is helpful because, my God, we all face drought and, bad markets and whatever. I mean, we're gambling every day in agriculture, in my opinion. No need to go to Vegas. Anyway, I knew the benefits, but I also had this really bad taste in my mouth. And so I guess going to California and seeing how clean and well kept it was another thing that helped me move toward yes, because I was thinking, oh, we're just going to have more trash, more surface damage to the ranch, which was not true, which was absolutely, in fact, I would say that wind farmers in general, they actually have to perform to a higher standard than other forms of energy extraction, and they do. I mean, I would give them, this company that now owns this wind farm, I'd give them a gold star on their willingness to keep things clean, keep the gates shut. They're always, they tell us when we've got animals on the road. We tell them when we see a problem with a turbine. So it's been a good neighbor relationship for us. That's where you've just got to know that that's going to happen before you'll say yes, I would think.
Yeah, and I know your perspective is with ranching and cattle grazing around these wind towers.
Oh yeah,
we've got several wind farms in our area that are farmed row crop around them, and that's some of the concern is cattle can walk around it, but now I have to maneuver my equipment around it as well. So what have you had conversations with others that are in that category of farming row crops rather than ranching?
Yes. Let's fast forward. After this wind farm was built in 2005, my phone rang off the hook, Tanner. People heard the story of this Yahoo cowboy that somehow got a wind farm built on his ranch. They want to know how I did it. And so I became a consultant, especially for farmers and ranchers who were being approached. And I would tell them my story. I told them what to watch out for, what I had learned at that point in time. And then eventually another gentleman approached me with a very different set of questions. And to make a long story short, I joined a development company in Western Kansas that it has developed a wind farm project there. But getting to your question, we had to assure the center pivot irrigators out there that we would not put a turbine in the middle of their circle. We always had to go to the corners where we would agree, we won't interfere at all. Now, dry land was a little different. They can maneuver around it. There's no guy wires to negotiate or anything. But we had to really convince those folks that we were not going to interfere with their farming operation. Of course, it's well understood now. There's plenty of wind farms out there that we're not going to disrupt. We want to do minimal disruption of your agricultural operation.
Yeah, and I think that goes to be said for a lot of the wind farms that I've seen put into place, that once they're up and construction's complete, it seems like the disturbance is very minimal. But I want to dive into how this works, because you're not selling the wind farm the land underneath where the tower is. It's a different type of agreement, right? That
is true. It's called a lease and easement agreement. So the lease has to do with where the turbines intersect with the ground. I'm going to put in a little factoid here. Again, I was concerned about the influence of the wind farm on our agricultural operation. This was in the early years when, believe it or not, GPS is a relatively new thing. And they had to compensate me for precisely the acres that I could no longer graze. And I made sure that, I know I'm going to lose a little bit of land because of the turbines on the ground, the access roads, and then the management O&M building that they were going to build, the operations building. And so they went around and precisely measured what was lost after it was built. And there are 50 turbines on the Ferrell Ranch, and we lost exactly 50 acres. And that includes, again, the turbines, the roads, and the O&M site. And so while we were doing it, because I was being questioned about this, I said, let's go up to the oil field and measure where the pump jacks are, the roads are, the spillage, the tank batteries, and let's just see how much land has been lost up there. And as it turns out, it was 1 acre per pump jack also. So my argument has been,
interesting.
We're going to lose a little bit of ground, but the benefit, in my opinion, far exceeds what that loss is. But so now I can't remember your question.
No, you're talking about that their lease and easement agreements.
Oh, yes.
You're not selling the land.
Are you ready to power through your harvest? Meet the Maya Cornheads. They're designed for maximum efficiency and unmatched durability in the toughest of conditions.
With precision engineering and advanced features, Maya Cornheads ensures every kernel counts, giving you the performance and reliability that you need. Get more from your harvest with equipment built to last.
Reach out to your local Maya Cornheads dealer or visit mayacornheads.com to find your perfect match today. Maya Cornheads, harvest with confidence.
So they lease in order to put the hardware on the land. The easement has to do with the wind. And it simply says, I cannot construct anything that's going to impair the wind flow that approaches those turbines. So I can't build any tall buildings. I can't put up any tree breaks. I can't do anything that would impair the wind. Of course, I can't imagine what I would do out here. This is a vast treeless prairie. So the easement issue is almost a non-issue, but that's the easement portion of the lease. It's a lease and easement agreement.
I just had a funny vision in my own brain to entertain myself. Sometimes when neighbors in town don't get along and they end up putting a sign up that says my neighbor's stupid or something like that, how funny would it be for one neighbor to build a billboard that blocks the wind right next to somebody else's wind tower itself? But yeah, in your area, you don't have neighbors that are close enough to even worry about. But one thing that I know when a wind farm, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll wait. There's an anecdote I was going to throw in.
Well, go ahead, because I'm gonna jump into taxes here.
You probably don't have coffee shops in your area like we do here, where people get together and chat. But this thing got pretty controversial, and I'm deciding I'll keep a low profile here. But one day I go to the local saloon, and I just want to get my hamburger and eat and get out of there because I don't really want to answer any questions. And one of my ornery neighbors, who actually is a good friend, but he wanted to put me on the spot. And he goes, "Hey, Pete." And of course, everybody looks up. There's a dozen cowboys in there. "I hear when you build that damn wind farm, there ain't going to be a breath of air in Beaumont because you're going to stop all the wind from blowing to Beaumont. You're going to have to buy all of us a clothes dryer because we ain't going to be able to dry our clothes up there." And so, that's the kind of thing that I encountered. And of course, unfortunately, some of those folks may have believed him. They might have thought, well, wait a minute, is Pete going to stop the wind?
Sure.
And so that's how those kind of things get going. And now that it's done, a lot of the people that were concerned about it are kind of like slapping their foreheads and saying, well, what was all the fuss? They're like, you're right, because it has not.
Well,
so.
The joke around here is we didn't realize how much the wind blew until the windmills went up. But now you have a visual every time the wind blows,
Yes.
what direction it's coming out of and how fast it's blowing.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of humorous. But I remember when they were coming through central Iowa, one of the sales pitches is how it was going to increase the local tax revenue for schools and public works to be able to provide extra assistance for our local communities. But if you're not selling the land, how is that happening?
Well, the Kansas legislature gave property tax abatement back in the 70s that they were envisioning that renewable energy would happen here. So the wind farms don't pay property tax. Now, they do pay something known as a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, as part of their agreement when they get a county permit, because they know they are going to have to provide, fire. They're going to have to provide EMS services. They're going to have to, in fact, the roads may need extra maintenance. And so most developers voluntarily pay extra into the county coffers because of the extra cost to the county of the wind farm. That's what happened here, and that's what happened throughout Kansas. Now, I don't know if they abated the property tax in Iowa, but by the way, they do pay. They don't pay for the machines. They don't pay property tax on the machines. But the ranch where the wind farm exists did change from agricultural to commercial property, and they do pay tax there. So there is some tax money going to the county, but they up the ante big there because, well, they wanted the county's support, and they got it.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the lease and easement agreement that you have to be able to speak on, and then maybe the experience you have through your consulting. How does the income look? Is it a base plus how much the wind blows? Is it a set fee? What are we to expect?
Great question. I'm not going to talk about my lease because we were so early in the game. Nothing was standardized at that point in time. So I've got kind of a one-off agreement that's a unicorn. But when I started working in Western Kansas, there was a standardization process. And I should have written it down, Tanner, but the first thing that will happen is there will be typically three levels of payment, and it'll be the greater of. So when a developer approaches a farmer or a rancher, he has no idea where those turbines are going to go. So the first thing you'll probably be offered is if you sign up, you'll get X amount per acre, no matter what. Okay. Then the next thing will be there will be a nameplate turbine size that may or may not come on your land. And in my case, it's a 1.5. They're going to offer a base rate, regardless of what that turbine generates based on that nameplate size. And then the top level will be, just like with oil, it's going to be production times price. So you'll be offered a royalty. And all those three levels of payment will be baked in, and it will typically say you get the greater of these in your lease payment. So that's kind of, I've described the general, and this is from what I've seen both consulting other farmers and ranchers. This is what we offered in Western Kansas in the project I worked on out there. It was 3 levels, and you get the greater of.
Yeah, it sounds similar to what is in this area. I know, especially when studies are going on, that initial fee for potential committed acres or committed area certainly is something that is handy. We've also got in our area a couple of pipelines that run through.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of what your ground is feasible for. So I appreciate that perspective. But now I want to know, at the end of your 30-year agreement, what is supposed to happen?
Great question. And, I was talking about this incredible investment. I knew going in that this developer who leases the Ferrell Ranch, I knew that the turbines had a 20-year lifespan. It had a 20-year warranty, literally. And so that's coming up. And I also knew that their power purchase agreement was going to expire in 20 years. The great thing about wind, and the reason that the developers, the utilities like it, is there is no question about the price. There is a question about how many kilowatt hours are going to come in, but they love knowing a fixed price. Imagine this, if we could get a fixed price for 20 years. Well, utilities really like wind power for that reason. So all of that is coming to an end. And to answer your question, I've already been approached about extending this agreement, because in order for them to go on, they've either got to keep these machines going. And Tanner, I'm going to back up just a moment. Do you remember I said that first company walked away in 98? Well, one of the reasons they walked away was the inefficiency of the machines at that time. And the efficiency of the machines keeps getting better, just like everything in our world having to do with electronics. I mean, think about what you're doing with your GPS-controlled tractors now that you couldn't do 20 years ago. Well, that evolution of electronics has occurred in turbine technology. And so each generation of turbine is getting more and more efficient. Wheat farmers in Kansas want to extract from horizontal acres. A wind farmer is interested in vertical acres. And so the bigger the wingspan, the propeller span that they have, the more energy they can collect. And so to get around to answering the question here, I've already been approached about extending this lease, because it seems to me, well, I know they are considering going to the next generation of turbines on the Ferrell Ranch.
Yeah, that is a concern that we've had around. Our family has 3 windmills that my grandpa agreed to, and they're the crisscross square base. It's a steel, the steel frame. And those, like you said, those are early. Those are completely phased out. But now our family is going through the process of, according to the end of the lease that was in place, now that property in which they were placed upon is supposed to be returned to its natural statement, to where it was before it was. So they're currently looking for bids and contractors to come and dismantle those wind turbines, and remove as much of those footings as necessary to make that ground return to farm ground, to be able to produce crop like it did prior to those towers existing.
And that is in place with our agreement. Furthermore, the county required the developer of the Ferrell Ranch here, it's called the Elk River Wind Farm, the county required them to post a decommissioning bond in case they would go bankrupt or whatever. The county didn't want to have to deal with all this machinery, and so there's a bond in place. But I'm told that the salvage value of the steel and the materials would easily pay for the salvage of the turbines if they were to come down. May I ask why you're not going to put in a new wind lease on that land?
That's a great question. I've actually not asked my dad that question, so I don't have that answer for you.
Okay.
It would be interesting to get the perspective of the neighbors that are in line. There's that wind farm itself was an original Enron, I think.
Oh, yeah.
When it would have gone in place.
Yeah.
So it's had a couple of ownership changes over the period of that contract. So I don't know if the infrastructure isn't in place. The infrastructure that's in place for carrying the electricity isn't large enough to put the new higher producing towers in place. All speculation, because I've not asked that question.
Okay. Well, it's just curious. They've had that royalty income for all these years. I'd like to keep. I'm going to negotiate with our developer to extend it, but I'm kind of back in the mix again of having to think this through because, well, I'm considering an agreement that's going to outlive me, quite frankly. So, and I'm consulting my successors. My two children will inherit I always tell them what my father told me. We don't own this place. We're just the caretakers here for a while. So they are actually going to be trustees rather than owners, but they'll get the economic benefit of the ranch and they love it as their ancestral home. But they chose not to go into ranching. So, but anyway, I want to keep it going. Furthermore, as I shared with you, I've still got a significant debt to pay. And, I needed to find another form of income. I mean, that was one of the pressures on me was like, can I keep up the 15-hour days that I was working? And so I was highly, incented to find another form of income here because I knew I couldn't keep that up, Tanner. I knew I couldn't keep working like that. And so when the wind farm came in, I let go of all the extra leased ground because I didn't need to work that hard. I didn't want to work that hard. And so it just came back to the core of the ranch. And so between my my livestock operation and the wind farm, man, I could sleep at night,
No, that's good. I want to take the next couple of minutes to kind of talk through, is it debunking myths? Is it dealing with the cons of the exploration and the process of these? I just kind of want to hit a couple of negative factors and get a quick response from you on each one of them. We've already talked about the long-term commitment. So we've already covered how that can be put in place, how that can be considered, the mitigation factors for what that looks like. But when you get the questions about land use restriction, it's different, your operation on pasture versus farming, but is it that big of a deal to have the service access roads, the property around the base of these towers? Is there a big problem with not being able to utilize that property like you did before?
We've not discovered that. Regarding the access roads, it actually, and I didn't see this one coming, Tanner. We actually rut. Imagine, one of the things we don't want to do is rut our pastures when we go out to feed. We've got livestock everywhere. And so imagine, we can now get to more areas of the ranch without rutting the pastures. So we can go out there on the service road, get to the livestock, feed them, get back on the service road. And so it's been a net plus for us to, in ranching at least. I know that wouldn't be a positive in farming, but for us, that was a big deal. The other thing we do here also is that this is a burn culture. The tallgrass prairie is typically burned, every 2 to 3 years. And so, we do tell them if we're going to burn it, because there's an area around the turbines of about, probably 20, maybe 20, 30 foot radius where they got clean gravel and it can't burn right up to the base of the turbine. It's not an issue, but we also have wildfires occasionally that are not intentional. And of course, everybody has to scramble when that happens. But, there's been basically no impairment. Let me back up. Certainly during construction, it was pretty chaotic. So I don't want to lie about that. There were, it's unbelievable to me. They built this wind farm in 6 months flat. They broke ground in May and they were done by the end of November. But during that time, this ranch employs 2 people, maybe 2.5 full-time equivalents. And so we're out here pretty much alone. But during that time, we had 200 workmen on the ranch every day. And it was it was a challenge to work around all of that during construction. But then once construction was over, again, we go back to their employees, our employees. It was a good mix. But so that was probably the greatest inconvenience we had. We use stock dogs a lot, and I didn't know this, but John Wagner uses stock dogs way more than I did, and he notices that when they're in the turbine area, the dogs may get a little confused because they're probably hearing a high-pitched whine that we can't. He says they're not quite as responsive, right. So there's that. But in terms of livestock behavior around the turbines, we don't see anything. They don't seem to be disturbed whatsoever by the presence of the turbines. The one thing, again, this is a treeless prairie. We do develop a cow sundial on the hot days because they'll line up in the shadow of the turbine and continue to follow that during the heat of the day. So it's kind of humorous. There's a little pushing and shoving as they all try to get in the shadow of the turbine going out there. We've got several pictures of that. It's kind of funny. The only other thing that I've experienced is that you really don't want to take a green colt out there because as the shadow of the blade comes around, that horse is going to jump over the shadow like a jumping rope each time it comes around. So we've got humorous stories about that kind of thing, but it has not impaired our capacity to ranch whatsoever. It has been, we just, again, the service crews have been great to work with. And again, that goes back to kind of know who you're going to do business with. And of course, you can't predict who they're going to sell to. And that's where I'm recommending go with a company that's probably going to stay with you from beginning to end if you can. Find somebody who's got longevity in the business and has a good reputation.
Right. And here in row crop country, I'll tell you that those access roads are also a benefit. There's a lot of focus on field compaction.
Yeah.
And when you can load your semis or your wagons or use those roads to reduce the amount of trips across your soil, it is a benefit. Now it becomes an inconvenience when you have to pick up your planter or your tillage tool and go around.
Yeah.
But use it, looking on the rosy side of a potential benefit is using those access towers themselves. But what about the argument of it creates an eyesore? You talk about your prairie being a treeless prairie. You could probably see for miles. God's country, watching sunsets and sunrises. But now you got blinking red lights out in front of you.
Well, that's a great question, Tanner. And that's the one that I must say that I don't blame those who say, I just don't want to look at them. It really comes back to who owns the view shed of this country, and I don't have an answer for that. I really don't. There are things that I would oppose if neighbors were trying to do next to me. So I actually have empathy for those who question that, the view of them. I don't blame you. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The other thing Sandy did for me before we built it was he had me go out and take a 360-degree view, a picture of the ranch, and then he superimposed the turbines on the land before it was built. So I could literally see what it was going to look like. And that also helped lower my stress factor. And I'm like, okay, they looked like large plants out there to me. And I actually asked him, instead of putting them in straight rows, would you weave them a little bit, make them follow the contour of the land, make them look like they're a little more natural here, even though they are huge machines. The red lights are an interesting thing, and that has come up in Kansas quite a bit. It is now, and this is interesting, it is now required that the red lights will be radar triggered. In other words, the only time we need those lights is when there's an aircraft within, 5 miles or whatever it has to be. So all new wind farms in Kansas are now, I believe, and again, I think this is correct. The new ones have to be fitted with a radar triggered lights so that the lights only come on when there's aircraft in the area. And then the pre-existing wind farms like ours the next time they have to replace the lights, they'll put in the radar triggering modem. So that's going to help with the light pollution, I hope. So I think that's a great idea personally.
Yeah. Now, what about the environmentalists? Are you finding dead birds all over your pasture now because they fly into these blades, into the towers?
That's a great question. And again, the developer, Sandy, when we signed up, he started measuring. They brought in a company, environmental company, West, I think was the name of it. Anyway, they started measuring all the wildlife that's out there 3 years prior to construction. And the canary in our coal mine is the greater prairie chicken. That's the bird. Well, that is kind of symbolic of the health of the tallgrass prairie. It's a ground nesting bird. And so we measured the birds prior to construction. And sure enough, and we knew this would happen, during construction, they disappeared. There's just too much activity out there. But then they gradually phased back in, and they ended the study in 2011. So that would have been 6 years after building it, because our prairie chicken population had recovered to pre-construction levels. So and admittedly, thanks to John and my management, we do everything we can to mitigate the effects of the wind farm. And we did things intentionally with our ranch management to make sure the habitat for the prairie chicken was healthy. We don't burn as much as our neighbors, for example, in the spring especially, which is when they're nesting. So we did everything we could to make sure the birds stayed healthy. I was also advised by several ecologists to watch for those animals that depend on hearing for their safety. One of those animals is the jackrabbit. He's got to hear the coyote coming. And does our jackrabbit population stay up and good? And it is. We have an abundance of deer. So we're looking to the wildlife here to tell us, do we have a healthy ecosystem? And the signals are good for us. So the wind farm, did it have an effect? Yes, everything has an effect. Yeah, it had an effect. I'm sure it did. But those keystone species that we're watching, specifically the greater prairie chicken and those jackrabbits, those populations have remained healthy. Oh, back to the bird kill.
Well, I think
they studied, let's see, for 3 years after the park was built, I would see the students out there with hard hats on, and they would do a spiral walk from the base out of the turbine. In 3 years of study, they never found one dead bird, not one. Now, we're not in a fly path here. We're not in a migratory path, but they finally quit looking after 3 years.
Right. No, and I think you kind of alluded to the last one that I know is popular, and that's the sound.
Oh, yeah.
If the dogs can barely pick up on a whistle and the jackrabbit can still keep itself safe, do you witness a noticeable sound? Is there noise in your background now?
We do. Our house is about a mile from the closest turbine, and the wind farm is to the west and south of us. So that's the prevailing wind. Some nights we will hear what sounds like either a river or a surf. And, if you take a broomstick and swipe it through the air really fast, that's the sound we're hearing, is the blades cutting through the air. We don't hear a mechanical sound, but we hear kind of a whooshing in the distance. Like I said, it resembles a river or the surf in the distance. And so we do hear that. We've had mechanical sounds. And of course, like if there's something wrong with the turbine, we call the manager and say, hey, number 23 is putting out a squeak. You need to get it oiled or whatever. And they will typically handle any kind of abnormal mechanical sounds that are coming from the turbines. Now, when you're at the base of the turbine, yes, you do hear the rotor sound. You can hear that. You can hear a mechanical sound when you're at the base of the turbines.
Well, Pete, you have been very forthcoming with your information. You've been very open and honest with your answers, and that's extremely valuable to our audience, and we appreciate that. I want to know from you, if we do have somebody that approaches us and wants to start inquiring about putting a farm or a tower on our land, what questions should we be asking?
Well, again, my mind, I would want to know, is it going to impair? And that's my first question. That's why my hard no came out, was like, I don't want to do anything that impairs my capacity to continue my agricultural enterprises here. I don't want that. And again, at the end of the day, it didn't impair it, except I did lose, like I said, 1 acre per turbine was lost off of this ranch. But then, of course, the economic impact back to me more than made up for that. And I think that everybody has to have, Tanner, I don't blame the ranchers who say, no, I don't want this. That's entirely their prerogative to say, I'm just not comfortable with this. I don't want it or need it. I just don't, I'm not very evangelical about this. I don't push it on anybody. And I don't, there are a lot of people that don't want to see any more wind farms in the Flint Hills, and okay, that's fine. There's plenty of ground in Western Kansas where they want them. So let's do that.
That's good. I do want to make sure our listeners know that there are resources out there. This interview is one resource, right? We can reach out to Pete. He's always going to be available to answer questions, but we also know that it's important for landowners that are considering these leases for wind energy projects to know that there are experts available. The Center for Rural Opportunity and Power, or CROP, knows that they have an unbiased approach to information and resources that landowners can use. So CROP's mission is to educate audiences about the benefit of energy independence. We can send them to cropamerica.com or send them an email at contact@cropamerica.com for more information. And Pete, that's who connected us with you.
Yep.
And I'm so glad that they did. I'm excited to share this with our listeners. I hope you enjoyed your time with us.
I did, Tanner, and I want to applaud you for the work you're doing to help enlighten your listeners to the possibility. And I wish you all well. This is not easy work we do, but I feel privileged to have the opportunity to work as I have. So,
well, Pete, if they do want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I prefer an email. Contact would be best from my point of view, and I'll be glad to recite my email. Or will you put that up, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, go ahead and recite it, and then we'll include that in our show notes.
Great. It's G.P. Ferrell, my last name, Ferrell, 3, the number 3, @gmail.com. So it's G.P. Ferrell.
That's perfect.
@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you again, Pete. We really appreciate you spending time with us.